Win big in 2024 with Team Sync from RotoBaller. Import your fantasy teams and sync your leagues. Get customized tools and tailored advice for your specific rosters and scoring settings, including live recommendations from the Live Draft Assistant, Free Agent Finder, and Lineup Optimizer. Sync an unlimited amount of NFL, MLB, NBA, and NHL fantasy teams from all of the major fantasy platforms. Get a discount for any premium pass using my promo code Knuckler. Just visit rotoballer.com/radio and start rotoballing like a boss. This podcast is also brought to you by Parlay Play Fantasy Sports. Use my referral code RotoBrady. Get that sweet, sweet deposit bonus. Paid contest coming to a state near you. They're giving out boosts and slashing lines all day long. Check it out. Very unique platform. A lot of fun. And what is up, everybody? This is Brady Grove bringing you another Interlude episode of RotoBaller's official MMA podcast. Tap that. And with me today, first of all, UFC Noche happened last night. Follow me on Twitter at RotoBrady. That's where I make picks for all kinds of major MMA promotions, boxing events, regional MMA. Follow the podcast at Tap That MMA Podcast on Facebook, YouTube, and Spotify. And with me today, 4-0 professional fighter. He's gone back and forth between light heavyweight and heavyweight for the span of his entire amateur and professional career, dating back to 2020. He has spent his entire professional career with Synergy FC, where he is currently their light heavyweight champion as of June 1st, I believe was the date of that. Give it up for Julius, Juice Box Walker. Julius, thank you so much for being here today. How's it going, man?
Dude, it is going great. I appreciate you for having me on, man.
So just, we'll cover some different periods of time in your career here, throughout. But to ask you about this most recent fight against Niall Bartling, and this is at Synergy FC 13 for the light heavyweight title. You've had a lot of title fights throughout your career that, for whatever reason, they never went, 5 rounds or whatever it was.
Yep.
You say on another interview, but Niall Bartling was a big test in a guy.
Yeah.
Has experience on the Ultimate Fighter. He, went into the Ultimate Fighter with an absolutely sterling professional record, and get him out of there with a second round finish, once again ending a professional fight inside the distance, had to have been super satisfying and super gratifying to you at this point in your career.
Oh, 100%, man. Niall was a huge step up in competition, and I was getting to the point where, my first 3 pro fights were 3 first-round finishes, so I was looking for that step up in competition, looking for somebody to kind of push me a little bit. And Niall, with his wrestling background too, that wrestling pedigree, obviously I'm looking to take this thing as far as I can and get in the UFC one day. And I feel like Niall is he's a step in the right direction. Not necessarily maybe a UFC level guy, but he's probably one of those guys that's, maybe 1 or 2 tiers below the UFC. So I've got to beat those guys to climb that ladder to get there,
And, the really important thing, because I think that you very accurately perceive, like, the quality of win that Niall Bartling was,
Yeah.
And the thing is, it's all about now as a guy that, you're 25 years old. Damn.
Yep.
And for a guy like you who's trying to make his way up to, a major promotion from Synergy FC, it's, that's maybe not a UFC quality win, but it's the kind of win that is could easily happen on the Contender Series.
Yeah.
Those kinds of matchups happen all the time where you're not exactly sure whether that, you think this guy has a higher ceiling and you're not necessarily sure if his opponent is a UFC quality guy, but he might be, on certain levels. So it's about collecting those wins and showing the brass of any major MMA promotion, not just the UFC, that those are wins that you're capable of getting and in emphatic fashion.
Exactly. And, I'm trying to show these guys that, for one, I'm willing to fight, whoever I'm asked to fight, as long as it's, as I'm on the regional scene, I'm early in my career, I'm doing things as smart as I can, but I'm trying to show these guys that I'm willing to fight for one. I'm going to be a good guy to work with. They're not going to have to beg me to fight. Like, I'll show up, I'll be on way, I'll be ready to go. And that was something I wanted to prove with that fight. And then also to continue to finish people. Obviously that's what they're looking for, is guys that finish people. They don't want to see, fans want to see a finish. So that's what I'm looking for every time.
Well, and there's so many things that I want to cover with you today, and I'm just going to hop around because really the last 2 professional fights that you had before Niall Bartling, We're
Mm-hmm.
both at heavyweight. All right.
Yep.
This is something that you've done throughout your entire MMA career.
Mm-hmm.
So did you really weigh in at 255 for those heavyweight fights? Like it's
Yeah.
psychology? Okay.
Yeah.
It's just like, look, your like background being in college basketball, and folks, he played 2 years of college basketball at Drury University.
Yep.
Uh, and you were all academic team in the conference your last season there. Crazy thing about your college basketball career, man, the season averages do not tell the story, because there were plenty of games where you got a lot of playing time and your points and rebounds were north of 15 points and north of 6 rebounds.
Yeah.
At 6'5", 220, like, you were a very like versatile tool on the basketball court. And just to speak real quick to this, what as a two-sport athlete, which is really what you are now, and I don't even know
Mm-hmm.
how like you considered yourself through your whole athletic career leading up to that point, but
Mm-hmm.
like, obviously watching your fights, your background in college basketball, uh, you have some very clear athletic advantages, not just
Mm-hmm.
heavyweight, but at 205 pounds. So
Yeah.
do you think that this is something that more and more college athletes, especially at the level where you maybe want to remain competitive in athletics, but if you're at a junior college or an NAIA school and you might not be getting scouted at that level, you think people are going to start making the transition more to boxing and MMA?
Oh, 100%. So I think there's a lot of guys like me because, I was a solid basketball player and I went on to play in college, but if I had tried to play professional basketball, it would have been very low level. Like, I was a solid basketball player, but at my height and kind of the way that I played, I wasn't really a full on guard per se. And like in the NBA, there's no 6'5", power forwards. So there's going to be guys like me coming out of like Division II schools and like you said, NAIA schools, maybe basketball players, maybe football players that, because for me, dude, it was just I needed to do something athletic. I stopped playing basketball and in 3 months I'd gained a bunch of weight, super unhappy. So there's going to be these guys that are like, oh, I want to do something athletic. Way more people are watching the sport now. I was already a fan of the sport, so it was like, you know what, I'll just go train. There's an MMA gym down the street. I'll go see what it's about, and then from there, I just kept showing up and kept building. I think you'll see a lot of guys like that, especially in the heavier weight classes because you look at the heavier weight classes, the skill level is not as high. Because I mean, you've got a guy like me who's I've been training for 5 years, so it's like you're not going to see nobody in 135 division is going to come in 5 years of training, be in the higher level that didn't have like a wrestling background or like a Muay Thai kickboxing. In the high weight class, athleticism is so important. So you just get these big athletic dudes are going to come over and start, doing their thing.
And folks, my apologies. I meant to play this as the intro for Julius, and I got so excited.
Main event of the evening ends at 1 minute and 57 seconds in the second round by armbar. Your winner and new Synergy FC Professional Light Heavyweight Champion, Julius Toothback Walker.
Let's go.
It's a cool belt they gave you too. It's a sleek one. But no, the thing about like the college basketball or any other athletes coming in, because the main example I think people would immediately think of is Greg Hardy, because it's the most accurate, right? Because like Brock Lesnar, plenty of like football players who like played on practice squads and stuff, but like Brock Lesnar was a Division I wrestling champion. That's a whole other thing. But
Yeah.
a guy who in the first round in UFC fights against legitimate heavyweights, legit top 10 guys, it was so close to getting finishes at a certain point. It was very clear at his absolute 100% health bar in video game, language. That dude was the most athletic dude in the cage every single time.
Yeah.
The power, the explosion that he had. The issue is once guys like that, especially at heavyweight, get to round two. And so, what has been kind of the adjustment process for you from going to, mainly participating in a sport that, the way you use your muscles and your stamina throughout the entire time, it's completely different to how you use it here. But if you can harness those advantages, it makes for a huge advantage.
Yeah, for me, I would say the hardest thing to transition to was wrestling. The cardio for wrestling was very different than basketball. I remember when I first started, on days that we would do like kickboxing sparring, Even though I was getting my butt kicked because I was fresh and I was starting into it, it wasn't necessarily making me super tired. But I remember on days that like the jujitsu days and the wrestling days, I would be like, 30 minutes of wrestling and I would be just gassed. And I was like, dude, this is insane. And I think for me, like obviously, if you go back to my amateur career, my 3 losses, all 3 of those losses were I was out wrestled by my opponent. Especially if you watch them back, especially in the 3rd round. All 3 of those losses, I lost the 3rd round decisively and was controlled for the entire round. And I was like, what am I going to do? Because I can't keep doing the same thing. So I just started trying to wrestle. Like instead of like in my rounds, like in my training, I was like, I'm just going to wrestle every single day until I don't suck at it anymore. And now it's funny because it's like, probably my strong suit of my game now overall is grappling over striking, but it's just kind of funny how that ended up working,
Like you've been able to put some gusto on some of your slams and stuff, and
Yeah.
you put like an athletic accent onto those and kind of make it your own, which I think has suited you really well, through the course of your professional career. But about that implication in the heavyweight division, because I've seen you on some other shows before talk about like really like you're a 205 pounder. It makes the most for you to be a light heavyweight. At the same time, dude, it's really easy to see you tearing through a lot of heavyweights on the regional level. As a lot of the fights in your amateur career went, it was very clear, especially on the regional level, when you're talking about like some of the SHP shows or B2 or any of those.
Yep.
The heavyweights that you're fighting do not have the athleticism of you, and it's not. And I don't want to. I forget who it even was against one of these dudes, but it's like you really are fighting some heavyweights at those regional levels they're big swingers, but like they're not in real shape. They can't keep up with your speed and your explosion level. That's why all those fights ended so quickly and so brutally. So to think about a young fighter like you trying to make his way, presumably to the Contender Series, to a tour undercard, whatever it might be, it's got to also be there in your head that like, I think comparatively, you might be a true light heavyweight, but even if you were at 235, 240 pounds, there's absolutely a path to you for you to one of those levels at heavyweight.
Oh yeah, and I think also one thing that'll help me is that I'll be willing to, like, if you look at how guys are entering the UFC nowadays, it's pretty much, there's the Contender Series, you got the Ultimate Fighter, which is obviously it's only 1 or 2 weight classes a year if they even do it, and then you got to take a short notice fight. Other than that, I mean, who's getting signed outright other than like major stars like Michael Chandler and like Kai Asakura, like those are guys that are getting signed outright. Other than that, you're getting short notice fight or Contender Series. And I'm gonna, like, my goal, especially after this Bevon Lewis fight, I finish him, and at that point, it's like be Ultimate Fighter vet, be the UFC vet. I'm just gonna keep staying ready and keep staying in fight camp. Be ready to take a short notice fight, and also being willing to fight at heavyweight, like short notice heavyweights. The UFC, I mean, dude, there's guys in the UFC. I watch the UFC heavyweight fights sometimes, and I'm like, man, I know for a fact I could beat that guy. The very least, if I got on top of that guy, I could. He would have a hard time,
Heavyweight kills me, man. It's like even I've had some like people in here that like were kind of the like super fight, super heavyweight kind of like category where it's like you're telling me that across this planet of 8 billion people, there's not more 265 pounders or 290, 300 pounders that you can't fill some of these divisions with? It's so frustrating. Like at heavyweight, how often like guys that we thought were prospects didn't end up being able to like eclipse the top 10 in the UFC. And there are heavyweights in the like I've had Harry Hunsucker on the show who had to get through into the UFC through the same way. How he had a late notice fight against Tai Tuivasa. And after that, then it's like, all right, well, if you want to keep your job, now you got to win 2 fights that were probably at the level you should have been at coming into the But at the same time, it feels like through organizations like Ryzen, through, KSW, Octagon, EFC, it seems like there's at least a niche across the world for if you really wanted to fight at heavyweight and you wanted to get to a higher, and if Ryzen was, in your definition of what a high level organization is, and it certainly is,
Mhm.
that like there's opportunity at heavyweight just because we all are watching it and going, where are the dudes coming up in this division?
Exactly. I think one issue that the UFC is having with heavyweights is the fact that big American kids aren't wrestling. They're playing basketball and football, and then they get done and they don't want to go into this stuff because it's hard. And you just so the big there's big 260 pound, 280 pound, 290 pound guys in the United States. They're just in the NFL, or they're playing in these football leagues and stuff like that, or they're playing basketball or something. And I kind of, and honestly, I mean, I get it. The whole the pay structure in MMA. Like if I could play in the NFL, dude, I would drop this stuff so freaking fast. You have no idea. I love fighting, but man, if I could get an NFL contract, I'd go do that so quick. So I think that's one thing that's going on right now. Is that issue, and then and then overseas, from what I hear, is a lot of those like the KSWs, the Octagons, this I can't remember what this new one is in the Netherlands. But some of these bigger European promotions, I've heard that they're not too big on Americans right now. That's just what I've heard through the grapevine there. Because if you look over there, there ain't no Americans on those shows. Americans are pretty much fighting in, LFA, all the shows on Fight Pass, UFC and stuff. And then over there, it's all the European dudes. But I'm not really sure, honestly.
And that's why I like Ryzen. I think you do see just like a little bit more of that, and like they are always willing to put on, like they got like sumo wrestlers like in their heavy
Yeah.
and stuff. Like that's what I like about Ryzen and a lot of like Asian promotions in general is like they're willing to, have some fun with some of that stuff, and their fans always love it. It's a different niche, of
Yeah.
the fan base, but so now at light heavyweight, right? Like
Hmm.
it's still a division where you have an advantage,
Hmm.
athletic. You would have that athletic advantage at any weight class that you fought in because it's still such a small percentage of people that played a sport like basketball at the collegiate level.
Yeah.
But with Synergy FC, you've spent your entire professional career with Synergy FC. What are some of the benefits of that? Like, because we see people in a lot of other organizations like Fury and Bellator and Cage Fury that do spend,
Hmm.
and some of them their whole amateur and their whole pro careers with the same organization. So, what has been the advantage to you since April of 2023 of being with Synergy FC?
Yeah, so my hometown, Springfield, Missouri, Synergy is really the only MMA show that does shows here in Springfield. So for one, it gives me the ability to fight in my hometown, which is really nice, especially because as a regional guy, a very big portion of my paycheck, especially for my first few professional fights, was from ticket sales. And it's way easier for me to sell those tickets right in my hometown versus if I was fighting a few hours away. And I mean, Synergy has taken care of me well. It's ran by Chris Gregory and Zach Cummings. Zach Cummings, UFC vet. He's kind of the brains behind the operation. And I've had a relationship with those guys for a pretty long time. Zach's also a guy that he's started off here in Springfield. So that's a big part of the reason why I've stuck with Synergy. Um, is the ability to fight in the hometown, and with the added ticket sales, honestly, it would be tough for some of the other organizations to pay. Not that I'm super concerned with the money right now. You know what I mean? I'm more concerned with advancing the career. The money I feel like will come later. But it is pretty tough for the other organizations to pay because I'm not gonna like start saying, because I've been offered fights by so many guys on LFA. I've been offered guys on Fury and CFFC, and like I've been offered guys on all of those shows. And I'm not gonna like start talking about how much they pay. They really don't pay that much at all. Even for like their good guys, like the I don't even know if I should say this, but I really don't care. The Philip Latu dude that fought on Contender Series like last week, he fought Izzy's guy.
Yeah.
The guy that Izzy's guy knocked out.
What's his name? It's Najaling.
Yeah, Sterling or something like that. I was watching that fight closely. Obviously, I watch all the 205 fights on the Contender Series. That Latu guy, I got offered to fight that Latu guy. That's one of the top. He's one of the top regional dudes, you know, that you can fight, and like they're not paying that much for that stuff at all. So it's like I'd rather, for me, I'm like, man, I'd rather just fight in my hometown. But now it's getting to the point where I'm like, all right, I need to fight the best competition because I need to be ready to take that step up in competition. But as long as synergy, as long as we can keep bringing in good dudes, you know, like we're able to bring in Bevon Lewis, you know, bring in Niall Bartling. As long as they can keep bringing in guys like that for me to fight, I'll keep beating these guys up. Like I would love to get, you know, Bevon went 1-3 in the UFC. Not that I'm looking past him per se, because he is still going to be a tough challenge. In my opinion, probably my toughest challenge yet. But as I move past that, it's like I want to fight somebody that maybe had a few more fights in the UFC, maybe had a little bit more success as I continue to build. I'm never going to just get a win and just start sitting and being like, all right, UFC, come sign me. Like I'm going to keep fighting, keep winning fights, and then they'll call. And I feel like they'll respect that. You know what I mean?
And there's got to be an advantage too to being like the dude in Springfield, Missouri, as opposed, because, you know, right now, if they're able to pull in dudes like Niall Bartling and like Bevon Lewis, and you know, they got you 2 fights in 2023, 2 fights already in 2024 that you've had. So it's clear that they're at least on their P's and Q's as far as the business is concerned, because you know that there's some guys that, you know, work with some of these regional organizations. It ends up screwing them hard because they wait around way too long, and you're dealing with a lot of unprofessional people sometimes. So sometimes it's the fighters, sometimes it's the promoters. But if they're able to bring in dudes like Niall Bartlett, who was at one point at least must have been on the UFC's radar, Bevon Lewis, you know, had dude, and we'll get to that in a second. But the dude fought Uriah Hall. You know, he was had fights against guys with high name recognition. And so if Synergy FC can pull those dudes in, why not be the dude in Springfield, Missouri, as opposed to in Cage Figure LFA, where you might have to, you know, fight 3 to 6 times at least before you get a title fight in one of those organizations, just because it's such a mass, you know, prospect feeder, you know, entity.
Exactly. And the way I see it is that my title is just as legit as any of their titles. Like whoever has all these other, like whoever's the Fury Light Heavyweight champ, the CFFC, I don't care. The Synergy's not on Fight Pass because look who I beat to get it, and I finished him. Like I finished an Ultimate Fighter veteran. Not that he is like I said earlier. It's not like I'm thinking that Niall's like, you know, just an absolute killer, a top level guy. But he's one of the higher level guys on the regional scene. So the way I see it is like I've got a legit title, and the promotion I'm in, and the guys that I'm fighting on it are pretty legit. So it's like, you know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
And, you know, to be fair to Niall Bartling and to, you know, because you're being very realistic about it, and I think we both appreciate that. But here's the thing about Niall Bartling. On the Ultimate Fighter, had an undefeated professional record before then. Still 7-2 as a pro. His loss on the Ultimate Fighter was to Zach Palga, who ends up, you know, being the runner up there, and was probably in the wrong weight class, as you know, as Niall probably was in that season of the Ultimate Fighter.
Exactly.
And he has 2 losses after the Ultimate Fighter. One was to you, and he already has a win since then. But the thing is, there is that Ultimate Fighter hangover that we see with a lot of people. You know, like plenty of dudes go on the Ultimate Fighter, they lose, and it's someone that you still thought had promise, but something about that show, you come off of it, and the emotional wear and tear of being away from people for so long, it's such an emotional buildup. You lose, you're there for the rest of the time, you know, watching everybody else go, but also staying in shape. You take a regional fight to try to get back on the UFC's radar, and it seems like a ton of people drop a handful after that, you know? So is Niall Bartling a legit regional fighter who, on any given weekend, dude, if the UFC needed someone for a beginning of the card fight, Those guys get calls like that all the time. That's how Michael Gilmore got his shot in the UFC.
I mean, there's guys in 205 and in heavyweight that Nia would beat simply due to the fact that, I mean, he does have he has wrestling pedigree, and if there's a lot of guys he can get down, and he can hold down and dominate. So he's a very legit win. I think with guys coming off of the Ultimate Fighter, coming off a Contender Series, and then having to go back to the regional scene, a lot of these guys are operating off of motivation, and motivation is one of those things that can come and go. You have to operate on discipline, but motivation is important. And I'm sure that it's hard to get motivated to fight. Like, I look at it from Niall's perspective. He was fighting, I can't remember who were the coaches on his season. I think he was the Nunez and Pena season, which was weird. I don't know why they did that, but he was on that season, and that like, so he's getting coached by, two UFC champion, whoever, I can't remember what team he was on, but he's in that whole environment. He was so close to the UFC, and now he's got to go back to the regional scene. We fought his UFC, his Ultimate Fighter fight may have only been at the Apex, but now he's got to go back to the regional scene. He's fighting these guys in Nebraska up there on his little stuff, and then he's fighting me in Memorial Hall in Kansas City, Missouri. It's got to be hard to get motivated for that. I'm sure he looked at me and he said, "This guy's 3-0. You know what I mean? This is who I'm fighting now. I'm fighting a 3-0 guy." And obviously he should have looked a little harder because he lost. But I think that's what happens. It's tough for these guys to get motivated after they get so close, and they've got to take a step back.
And so, on that note, Saturday, November 16th, Synergy FC 16. You're going to be defending the Synergy Light Heavyweight Championship against former UFC middleweight Bevon Lewis. Bevon Lewis always actually bigger than I remember him being. Like at 6'3", I never remember him like that. It was I always felt stouter than his competition. But this is a dude with 2 Contender Series victories in his career, one against a guy with the last name Urbina. That's always meaningful, at least at that level. And a win over Colin Huckbody at LFA. Fights against Darren Stewart. A win against Daquan Townsend. That is an entry-level fight. That's kind of what we were speaking of a lot of guys that you could interchange at the bottom level of the UFC level and the top level of the regional level. And so
100%.
What do we know about that? We don't necessarily. Lost to Trevin Giles, and then still in high-level organizations, PFL on the Challenger Series card back in 2022, a loss to Marcelo Nunes, coming off a knockout loss to Ozzy Diaz at LFA 184 May of this year. This is definitely the biggest name that you faced in your career. I think that's very fair to say. It's a dude we've seen on UFC pay-per-view cards multiple times and fighting legit UFC middleweights. He's had Contender Series success. Fought a dude, like we said, as good as Uriah Hall. So this is a huge opportunity that, this is a huge fight that Synergy FC is able to put on. It's great. It's legitimizing, right? It has to be when you have a former UFC fighter that's coming in and challenging for your belt. That's a big deal for the organization. So, but at the same time, people always say, it's just another fight, all that kind of stuff that at least people feel like they should say. How do you feel leading up to this one after, there was a lot of time where, you thought you were having one opponent, turns out it's going to be another. You've got till November, so, still it's not like that was a shock to you or anything. There's more than enough time to wrap your head around fighting Bevon Lewis. And and you announced it super confidently. You feel good about this. I can tell without even having asked you. So how do you feel leading up to this one? What was the process like of getting this fight booked? And how do you feel about fighting a guy with the pedigree that he does?
I definitely feel good about it. It was super smooth getting it all set up. He was like this guy was he was very game. He was ready to go. You know what I mean? They, from my understanding, they messaged him, and I don't even think they had to ask him twice. He was ready to fight. And that's something, for one, that excites me, and I respect that a lot. I think that he's a solid opponent. You know what I mean? I have a lot of respect for him. The way that I look at it is that he fought at the highest level. So that means he knows how to train at the highest level. He if you go back earlier in his career, he was at Jackson Wink back in the day, and I'm sure he trained with John Jones back in the day. So he's been in the gym with some of the best guys in the world. So I expect him to put in a good training camp. If he doesn't, that's on him. But I expect him to come in the best Bevon Lewis we've ever seen. But I honestly just think that after 3 minutes, I'm better than he is. He's a very good fighter for about 3 to 5 minutes, and then after 3 to 5 minutes, I think he's pretty average. And I think that I'm going to be able to kind of continue. I think I can continue to fight longer than and I'm a little bit better as the fight as both guys are tired. I think that's a strength that I'm going to be able to show. It's a big part of the reason I beat Niall. I mean, Niall won the first round against me, and then in the second round it was a different story. I think this could potentially look similar to that. He's a solid guy. I think he's a career middleweight, and he should be a middleweight. When I look at him, he's got very skinny legs. He's a tall, long guy, but he's got these skinny little legs. He's good everywhere, but he's not great anywhere. And that's not to say that I'm great anywhere. I just think that I just don't think that this dude can beat me. Like he can, you know what I mean? Everybody can. We can all beat each other. But whenever we get locked in there on November 16th at the Shrine Mosque in Springfield, Missouri, in front of 3,500 screaming people cheering for me and not him, he's probably going to get knocked out.
And that's the thing too, is like you've always been confident in your gas tank and your cardio. And it's still something that like we've gotten to see you really display very little, but to no fault of your own or to fault of your own, because you finish people before it goes to 3 rounds.
Yeah.
But this is a guy that you got to know that like his gas tank is probably going to be game for this. At least. But is this going to be 5 rounds or 3?
It'll be scheduled for 5.
Okay.
So if but the Nile fight was also scheduled for 5. That's another really nice thing I think is I prepared for, I found out I was fighting Nile within a week of fighting Mike Cook in March of this past year. So I knew I was fighting a 5-round fight. I had 2 full months to prepare for a 5-round fight. If you've got more than 6 weeks to prepare for a fight, you have 0 excuses whatsoever. So once again, I've been fighting Bevon for the last. I've really known I'm probably fighting him for like 3 weeks now or so. So it's like I've known that I'm fighting this guy for a while. I've already been getting my body ready to go through a really hard camp, and like I just got done training for 5 rounds. Like everything I was doing was with the intention of being like I need to be ready for 25 minutes. And I don't even know if he's ever had a professional fight scheduled for 5. You know what I mean? Not that I've ever gone 5, but mentally that's what I'm expecting. Is I'm expecting to get like I'm ready. I need to be ready for 25 minutes of hell. And I like the fact that I have that little leg up. I like the fact that in the last his last UFC fight, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was 2020.
I think so.
So he's fought twice since then. I started my career in 2020. I owe it since he got out of the UFC, he's managed to fight 2 times. I fought 14, and I went from being an amateur white belt to where I'm at now. So I've been in this game. I'm doing this. This is my goal. I think he's a guy that's on his way out. He's 34 years old. I don't what is his end game in fighting? He's probably not making it back to the UFC. They don't want 35-year-olds. He's doing this for something to do to finish out his career. I'm young, hungry. You know what I mean? I'm on an upward trajectory, and I think he's on a downward trajectory. But once again, the guy's dangerous. You know what I mean? He's going to come to fight. I hope he hears this, and maybe he'll come to fight even more. I think it's going to be a good fight. It's going to be good for Synergy, good for Springfield, Missouri, and it's going to be really good for me. So I'm super excited about it.
And It's interesting to have this fight where, like you said, like he was super down for it, immediately. And so you got you, who's, very hungry and like on the way up, and a dude that's like seems like he's very hungry and is in it for the love of the game. It's a very interesting crossroads that you guys find yourself there. But it's also the interesting fact of you're almost a decade younger, and now that 25 in this sport is super young still,
Yeah.
and you've been able to fight twice a year, and a lot can happen, after two more impressive wins, as the champion of a regional organization. So, it's got to be like an interesting mental balancing that you're doing, where it's like, look, like no matter what happens on November 16th, it's not a career maker or breaker either way.
Nope.
But at the same time, this is a great test for you at this point. And like it's not too early for you. I think that this is the exact right time to fight Bevon Lewis at this point. And you're going to learn, no matter what, it's going to be a great experience for you, whether it's a win or a loss, really.
Exactly. Like for one, I'll have the confidence of the fact that I've stood in there with a guy that fought in the UFC 4 times. I know from his perspective, like we were saying, this guy has gotten in a cage and stood across from Uriah Hall. If he gets in the cage and stands across from me, well, like, what does he have to be intimidated of? I'm a guy that's had 4 professional fights. I turned pro last year. You know what I mean? Like, so he might not be intimidated by me, but I think that gives me a good opportunity because I think there's a good chance he might overlook me to an extent. He doesn't even, I haven't even truly, in my opinion, showed like the full arsenal of what I'm capable of. And as someone like you said, I'm 5 years into the sport, 25 years old. I don't even think I know what I'm fully capable of yet. It's perfect timing. These kind of things, they come together, and it's one of those things. I'm really lucky that I've even got this opportunity. The fact that I'm getting to fight a former UFC fighter in my hometown in my 5th pro fight is crazy. So I've got to take these opportunities and make the most out of them. But at the end of the day, man, I'm just blessed that I get to even get in there.
Well, folks, this has been another interlude episode of RotoBallers official MMA podcast. Tap that again. Follow me on Twitter at RotoBrady, and follow the podcast at Tap That MMA Podcast on YouTube, Facebook, and Spotify. Thank you so much to Julius Juicebox Walker for being on today. Julius, I wish you nothing but the best of luck and best of health and everything moving forward in your career. I'm going to be watching closely. And if there is if there's anything else you want to say or anybody you want to shout out, the floor is yours.
Dude, I appreciate you big time. First of all, thanks for having me on, man. It means a lot. The fact that anybody even wants me on their podcast, hear what I have to say, it's really cool to me. So I really appreciate you, dude. A quick shout out to some of my platinum sponsors. Big shout out to Specialty Family Tree, supported me, getting me through this fight camp. The support they've been's unreal. Baitworks, one of the best bait and tackle shops around. So for all the boys out there that like to go fishing, you know what I mean? Go hit up Baitworks, grab yourself some stuff. Shout out to Elite Fabworks, high level fabrication services, Sigwo Industries, Pet Wants Pet Store, Mad Reels. Geez. Dude, it's so hard. Eventually, you just start forgetting. You're smart. Team Fusion West Plains, that's another sponsor. Cheapers Creepers. Who I think that's it. So shout out to all my sponsors, my family, everybody, and I appreciate you, brother.
Folks, thank you so much for listening. Hope you enjoyed UFC Noche last night and all the oh, dude, Jesus Christ, so I don't know what I thought the at-home viewing experience was going to be, but that well exceeded my expectations.
Dude, it was so awesome. If you guys haven't watched it, you guys got to go watch it.
I cannot believe that is even possible, but that is the year 2024, and mixed martial arts is a different thing now. Well, folks, thank you so much for listening. Enjoy this Sunday. It'll be Monday by the time that this comes out. We got a UFC hiatus coming up this week. But anyway, we'll get through that. Have yourselves a good time in between then. Peace.